Have you ever noticed how some women seem to defy the conventional understanding of aging? Not just physically, but in the radiance they emanate, a certain quality that transcends the material dimension of existence. This observation leads us to one of the most profound questions at the intersection of Kantian philosophy and our everyday experience. What does it mean to exist beyond the mere appearances that our senses perceive? Most people navigate through life accepting the surface-level reality presented to them, rarely questioning the deeper structures that organize our experience. When confronted with phenomena that challenge our conventional understanding, like the timeless essence some individuals seem to manifest, we often lack the philosophical framework to make sense of these experiences. Kant's transcendental idealism, with its distinction between phenomena and noumena, offers us precisely such a framework, yet these concepts often remain locked behind complex terminology and seemingly impenetrable texts. Many feel an intellectual vertigo when approaching Kant, that sense of standing at the edge of profound wisdom, yet unable to cross the threshold into genuine understanding. By the end of this exploration, however, you will have gained not just an intellectual grasp of Kantian concepts, but an intuitive sense of how they illuminate aspects of your lived experience that previously seemed mysterious or inexplicable. The insights we uncover together won't merely expand your philosophical vocabulary. They will transform how you perceive the world around you, how you understand your own consciousness, and perhaps most importantly, how you relate to those remarkable souls who seem to vibrate at a different frequency. Understanding these concepts now, rather than relegating them to some future intellectual pursuit, may fundamentally alter how you experience reality from this moment forward. So let us embark on this journey together, exploring how Kantian philosophy might explain the phenomenon of ageless feminine energy and the spiritual dimensions it reveals. The cornerstone of Kant's philosophical revolution was his insight that we don't perceive the world as it is in itself, but rather as it appears to us after being processed through the structures of our consciousness. This distinction between appearances, which Kant called phenomena, and things as they exist in themselves, which he called noumena, provides our first clue for understanding the spiritual quality that certain women seem to embody. According to Kant, time and space are not features of reality itself, but rather forms of our intuition, the lenses through which our minds necessarily perceive the world. If we take this seriously, then aging as we conventionally understand it belongs strictly to the phenomenal realm. It is part of how humans appear within the framework of time, not necessarily how they exist in themselves, at the level of what Kant would call their intelligible character. Those women who maintain a youthful aura might be manifesting something closer to their noumenal nature, something that transcends the limitations of temporal existence as most people experience it. Their presence seems to suggest a different relationship to time itself, not as something that weighs upon them, but as a dimension they move through with unusual freedom and grace. This isn't to say that they somehow escape the physical processes associated with aging, but rather that they manifest an essence that isn't fundamentally defined or constrained by these processes. They reveal to us, through their very being, that human existence has dimensions that transcend mere materiality. Kant argued that while we cannot know things as they are in themselves, we can think them. In other words, While our knowledge is limited to the world of appearances, our concepts can reach beyond this limitation, pointing toward realities that transcend our direct experience. The spiritual field in which these remarkable women seem to exist might be understood as one such reality. It's not empirically verifiable in the conventional sense, yet we intuit its presence through its effects within our experience. We perceive these women differently, not because our senses detect anything supernatural, but because something about their presence triggers in us a recognition of transcendent possibilities. In Kantian terms, we might say that they make manifest certain aspects of the supersensible realm, bringing them into the world of appearances in a way that others do not. Their youthful aura isn't a physical property, but rather the phenomenal expression of a noumenal quality, a spiritual vibration that registers in our consciousness as a kind of agelessness. This helps explain why such individuals often seem to possess wisdom beyond their years, or conversely, why some elderly women maintain the vibrant energy typically associated with youth. In both cases, what we're perceiving isn't primarily a function of chronological age, but rather a manifestation of spiritual development that transcends temporal categories. I want to pause here and ask you directly, how many times have you encountered someone whose presence seemed to transcend ordinary temporal constraints, making you wonder if there might be dimensions to human existence that our conventional understanding fails to capture? That sense that some individuals aren't merely defying aging, but operating according to different metaphysical principles altogether. You're not alone in this experience. Many of us carry this quiet intuition, this sense that Kant's distinction between the phenomenal and noumenal realms might actually illuminate aspects of our lived experience. I'd love for you to share your perspective in the comments. It could be something as simple as, my biggest challenge in understanding Kant's perspective on transcendent existence is Matuan. Isioils. Your comment not only helps me create content more directly aligned with your actual questions and concerns, but also creates a community where others, who might be facing the same philosophical obstacles as you, can feel understood and less alone in their intellectual journey. It's through this sincere exchange that we grow together. So please, pause the video for a moment and share your experience. Your voice matters more than you might imagine. Kant's moral philosophy offers another perspective for understanding this phenomenon. For Kant, human dignity stems from our capacity to act according to moral principles that transcend empirical conditions. When we exercise our moral freedom, making choices based on rational principles rather than merely responding to natural impulses, we participate in what Kant called the kingdom of ends, a community of rational beings who treat each other as ends in themselves rather than mere means. The women who maintain a youthful aura often embody this moral dimension with particular clarity. Their interactions with others tend to be characterized by a profound respect for human dignity, a quality that transcends self-interest and manifests as genuine care for the well-being of those around them. This orientation toward the other as an end in themselves creates a different quality of presence, one that doesn't drain energy, but rather generates and amplifies it. Such women aren't exhausted by their interactions, but rather energized by them, because they've aligned themselves with what Kant might describe as their true, rational nature. The youthful quality they manifest isn't about physical appearance, but rather about the life force that flows through them, unobstructed by the various forms of self-obsession that typically accompany aging in our culture. They remain young in spirit precisely because they haven't fallen into the trap of treating themselves as mere objects in the world, subject to the determinations of natural causality. Instead, they maintain an awareness of themselves as moral agents, capable of initiating new causal chains through the exercise of rational freedom. One of Kant's most profound insights was his recognition of the active role that consciousness plays in constituting experience. Far from being passive recipients of sense data, we actively synthesize the manifold of intuition according to the categories of understanding. This synthetic activity isn't optional, but constitutive of experience itself. There could be no experience for us without it. The women who vibrate in a different spiritual field have often mastered this synthetic activity at a deeper level than most. They don't merely accept the categories of understanding as given, but have developed the capacity to modify how these categories structure their experience. In particular, they relate differently to the category of causality, understanding that while physical causality operates within the phenomenal realm, there exists alongside it what Kant called causality through freedom, the capacity of rational beings to initiate new causal chains independently of natural determination. This dual perspective allows them to acknowledge the physical processes of aging without being defined by them. They recognize that while their bodies exist within the causal nexus of the natural world, their essential selves, what Kant would call their transcendental egos, exist beyond this nexus. The youthful aura they project stems from this recognition, from their refusal to identify themselves wholly with their empirical egos, those aspects of themselves that are indeed subject to the ravages of time. They maintain their radiance precisely because they understand, at some level, the truth of Kant's insight that time itself is not an objective feature of reality, but a form of our intuition. Kant's aesthetic theory offers yet another window into this phenomenon. In his analysis of the sublime, Kant describes an experience in which we encounter something that overwhelms our sensory capacities, triggering a two-step process. First, a kind of cognitive failure as we try and fail to comprehend what we're experiencing. Second, a higher-order pleasure as we recognize our capacity to think beyond the limits of sensory experience, affirming our transcendent nature. The women who maintain a youthful aura often evoke this experience of the sublime in those around them. There is something about their presence that exceeds our ordinary categories, that resists full comprehension, yet points toward transcendent possibilities. They remind us, through their very being, that reality extends beyond what can be empirically verified, that there are dimensions to human existence that transcend materiality. This is why encounters with such women often leave us feeling simultaneously unsettled and elevated, challenged yet inspired. They disrupt our conventional understanding while opening us to higher truths, much as the experience of the sublime disrupts our sensory apparatus while connecting us to our super-sensible nature. Their youthful aura isn't merely pleasing in the conventional aesthetic sense. It's sublime, pointing beyond itself to metaphysical realities that exceed phenomenal comprehension. For Kant, our experience is structured not only by the categories of understanding, but also by certain fundamental ideas of reason, the self, the world, and God. These ideas don't constitute knowledge in the strict sense, since they reach beyond possible experience, but they regulate our cognition, providing unity and coherence to our understanding. The women who vibrate in a different spiritual field often seem to have developed a more intimate relationship with these regulative ideas, particularly the idea of the self. They understand, perhaps intuitively rather than intellectually, that the self, as we typically conceive it, is not a thing in itself, but a regulative idea. This understanding liberates them from the kind of anxious self-maintenance that characterizes much of human experience, particularly as we age. Rather than desperately clinging to a particular conception of themselves, they remain open to the mysterious ground of being from which selfhood emerges. This openness manifests as a kind of perpetual becoming, a youthful quality that isn't about preserving a particular state, but about remaining in creative dialogue with existence itself. They embody what Kant might call the productive imagination, the capacity to synthesize experience in novel ways rather than merely reproducing established patterns. This creative relationship to existence itself keeps them vibrationally young, regardless of their chronological age. Kant's understanding of teleology, the study of purpose or ends in nature, provides another perspective on this phenomenon. In the Critique of Judgment, Kant argues that while we can't objectively know that nature operates according to purposes, we must think it as if it does in order to make sense of biological organisms and ecosystems. The women who maintain a youthful aura seem to have intuited a higher teleology, a purpose that transcends mere biological functioning. They live not merely to survive and reproduce, the ends that natural selection has programmed into our species, but according to higher principles that align with what Kant would call the final end of creation, moral development, and the cultivation of rational freedom. This alignment with higher teleological principles creates a different quality of energy, a vibration that doesn't deplete over time, but rather becomes more refined and powerful. Such women often appear to be fulfilled in a way that transcends conventional markers of success, having discovered a purpose that connects them to something greater than themselves. This sense of purpose creates a youthful energy because it continuously renews their engagement with life, preventing the kind of stagnation that typically accompanies aging in our culture. They remain vibrationally young because they are aligned with principles that transcend temporary circumstances, connected to ends that give their existence meaning beyond mere survival and comfort. In his moral philosophy, Kant distinguishes between acting from inclination and acting from duty. Actions performed from inclination, even when they conform to moral requirements, lack true moral worth because they stem from contingent desires rather than respect for the moral law itself. The women who vibrate in a different spiritual field often manifest this distinction with particular clarity. Their actions tend to flow not from calculated self-interest or fleeting emotional states, but from deeper principles that transcend personal advantage. This orientation toward duty, toward what is universally right rather than merely personally satisfying, creates a different quality of presence. There is something timeless about individuals who act from principle rather than impulse, a certain dignity that transcends the vicissitudes of fortune and circumstance. The youthful aura that such women maintain stems in part from this moral orientation, They remain vibrationally young because they haven't succumbed to the kind of moral compromise that typically accompanies aging in our culture, the gradual surrender to expediency and self-interest that drains life of its higher meaning. Instead, they continue to act according to principles that align them with their true, rational nature, maintaining a connection to the super-sensible realm that Kant associated with moral freedom. For Kant, our experiences of beauty and sublimity aren't merely subjective preferences, but reveal something important about the structure of human consciousness itself. When we judge something as beautiful, we make what Kant calls a judgment of taste, which involves a kind of disinterested pleasure that we expect others to share. This expectation reveals an implicit belief in what Kant called a common sense, not mere conventional opinion, but a shared capacity for aesthetic appreciation that transcends individual differences. The women who maintain a youthful aura often manifest this common sense with particular clarity. Their aesthetic judgments tend to transcend mere fashion or conventional standards of beauty, reflecting instead a deeper appreciation for harmony, proportion, and meaning. This refined aesthetic sensibility creates a different quality of presence, one that isn't defined by adherence to external standards, but rather by an internal compass that guides them toward authentic expression. The youthful quality they manifest isn't about conforming to culturally defined standards of youth, but rather about expressing an inner harmony that transcends temporal categories. They remain vibrationally young, precisely because they haven't surrendered their aesthetic judgment to conventional standards, maintaining instead a direct relationship with beauty that keeps them in touch with the transcendent dimensions of existence. Kant's understanding of faith offers yet another perspective on this phenomenon. In the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant famously declared that he found it necessary to deny knowledge in order to make room for faith. By this, he meant that by recognizing the limits of theoretical reason, the boundaries of what we can know with certainty, he created space for what he called practical faith, belief based not on empirical evidence, but on moral necessity. The women who vibrate in a different spiritual field often manifest this kind of practical faith. They live according to principles that can't be empirically verified, but are nevertheless essential for meaningful human existence. Their faith isn't blind adherence to dogma, but rather a practical orientation toward transcendent values like justice, beauty, and goodness. This orientation creates a different quality of presence, one that isn't mired in cynicism or despair, but rather animated by hope and purpose. The youthful aura they maintain stems from this practical faith, this refusal to limit reality to what can be empirically verified. They remain vibrationally young, precisely because they haven't succumbed to the kind of disenchantment that typically accompanies aging in our culture, the gradual surrender to materialist reductionism that drains life of its mystery and meaning. Instead, they maintain an openness to dimensions of reality that transcend scientific explanation, an openness that connects them to the inexhaustible source of being itself. Kant's notion of the highest good provides our final perspective on this phenomenon. For Kant, the highest good represents the perfect union of virtue and happiness, a state in which happiness is distributed in exact proportion to moral worth. While Kant believed that this perfect union could never be fully realized within the phenomenal realm, he argued that practical reason requires us to postulate its possibility, which in turn leads to the practical postulates of God and immortality. The women who vibrate in a different spiritual field often seem to have intuited something of this highest good. Their lives manifest an unusual harmony between virtue and happiness, not in the sense that they never suffer, but in the sense that their well-being doesn't depend on external circumstances, but rather on inner alignment with moral principles. This alignment creates a different quality of presence, a kind of serene joy that transcends the oscillation between pleasure and pain that characterizes most human lives. The youthful aura they maintain stems from this inner harmony, this connection to a source of happiness that doesn't deplete over time, but rather deepens with moral development. They remain vibrationally young, precisely because they've discovered a form of happiness that isn't dependent on the fading pleasures of youth, but rather on the enduring satisfaction of moral growth. In them, we glimpse something of Kant's kingdom of ends, a moral community in which rational beings treat each other with the dignity they deserve, creating together a world in which virtue and happiness align as they should. If you have ever felt overwhelmed by the complexities of philosophical thought, know that you are not alone on this journey. The path to understanding Kant need not be solitary or confusing. I invite you to subscribe to this channel and become part of a community of individuals who, like you, seek clarity amidst the turbulence of fragmented philosophical information. By subscribing, you will receive weekly reflections that transform seemingly inaccessible concepts into practical insights for your life. We are not merely studying philosophy. We are learning to think with greater depth, to question with greater wisdom, and to live with greater purpose. Click the subscription button now, not as an obligation, but as a gift to your own intellectual development. And if this content has brought some clarity to you today, leave your like as a way of saying that we are together in this quest for true knowledge. Remember, understanding Kant is not merely an academic exercise. It is a way of awakening to a more conscious and authentic existence, particularly in how we perceive those remarkable souls who transcend conventional limitations and remind us of our own transcendent potential. The women who maintain this youthful aura exemplify what Kant might call the integration of theoretical and practical reason. In the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant established the limits of theoretical knowledge, demonstrating that we cannot know things as they are in themselves, but only as they appear to us within the forms of our intuition. In the Critique of Practical Reason, he showed that through moral action, we participate in a dimension of reality that transcends these limitations, actualizing our freedom in ways that can't be comprehended within the deterministic framework of natural science. The women who vibrate in a different spiritual field have often achieved an unusual integration of these two dimensions of human experience. They neither deny the empirical realities of existence, including the physical processes of aging, nor allow themselves to be defined exclusively by these realities. Instead, they maintain a dual perspective, acknowledging the phenomenal conditions of human life while simultaneously expressing the noumenal freedom that constitutes our essential nature. This integration creates a different quality of presence, one that isn't fragmented by the artificial division between theoretical and practical concerns, but rather unified by a comprehensive vision that embraces both. The youthful aura they maintain stems from this integration, this refusal to sacrifice either empirical realism or transcendental idealism in favor of a one-sided perspective. They remain vibrationally young precisely because they haven't succumbed to the kind of metaphysical narrowness that typically accompanies aging in our culture, the gradual surrender to reductionist frameworks that cannot accommodate the full range of human experience. Instead, they maintain an openness to the mystery of existence itself, an openness that connects them to the inexhaustible source of creativity that underlies all manifestation. In the end, the women who maintain a youthful aura and vibrate in a different spiritual field remind us of what is perhaps the most profound lesson of Kantian philosophy, that human existence cannot be reduced to its empirical dimensions alone. We are beings who straddle two worlds, the phenomenal realm of natural causality and the noumenal realm of moral freedom. When we forget this dual nature, identifying ourselves exclusively with our empirical egos, we become subject to the determinations of natural causality, including the processes of aging and decay. But when we remember our transcendent dimension, our capacity to act according to principles that originate not from natural necessity, but from rational freedom, we participate in a reality that transcends temporal limitations. The women who maintain a youthful aura serve as living reminders of this transcendent possibility. They show us, through their very presence, that aging as we conventionally understand, it is not an inevitable fate, but rather one possible relationship to time among others. They reveal, through their radiant energy and timeless wisdom, that the human spirit need not diminish with age, but can instead continue to evolve and expand, transcending the limitations that most people accept as given. In doing so, they offer us a glimpse of our own potential for transcendence, our capacity to manifest in this world something of the noumenal reality that constitutes our essential nature. They invite us to remember who we truly are, beyond the appearances that our senses perceive, beyond the categories that our understanding imposes, beyond the temporal framework that structures our experience. They call us to awaken to our own transcendent nature, to vibrate at a frequency that resonates with the deepest truths of existence itself.